Hi, everybody. Welcome to Playing with Inference. So, the common narrative in AI and gaming is talk on cost savings and asset generation, bigger, faster, factory-from content. But today we're diving into the real second-order challenge, the brutal economics of running generative systems at scale. We're going to explore why it isn't just about saving money, but also understanding how to strategically spend compute to build category-defining entertainment.
With us today is Josh English, the current Chief Technology Officer at Series Entertainment, one of the few game studios and startups out there focused very specifically on the application of generative AI and machine learning to the game industry. Very excited to have Josh on. Josh has a background in the game industry. I've been in the game industry for 20 years or so, worked on America's Army and a Game of War. It's great to have you, Josh.
Well, it's really great to be here. Thank you for having me on today.
Yeah.
Welcome.
No, Josh, it's great to have, for those who listen, we do usually have a topic and have some ideas in mind. Ramon already introduced that. And I was looking over the notes that Josh has sent about what we're going to talk about. I have been so excited because there is almost, Josh, you are like one of the first people I've bumped into that wants to talk about these concepts and this is stuff that I've been thinking about for a while, have talked about it, and I don't feel like enough people are thinking about it. I think this is a topic that is really important for those who are developing games with generative AI and studios. Particularly, it's conversations I have with larger studios, with hyperscalers. So we're going to talk about why it's so expensive and what we can do about it. I'm curious, though, why is this the topic on mind for you? And set us up a little bit for your framing on it.
Probably for you and the audience to understand why I'm thinking about this so much, why I want to talk about it today, is because we started off a couple of years ago using generative AI to make video games. And you're going to see a common narrative today where a lot of people are using generative AI to make assets. It's really becoming the common narrative. And if you look at the stats, I believe 82% of small game studios are using Gen AI to make assets or develop a video game. 92% of them have reported that their development velocity has increased by 25% or greater. So if you imagine a world where anybody can make a high quality video game asset, that asset's rapidly becoming a commodity now. And as we all know, when a commodity becomes basically infinite and free, how do you differentiate against all the competition? This is an experience we've had directly making games for Netflix. We've made 4 titles for them so far. We built them with AI. They have AI assets inside of them. And we have a couple more in the pipeline where we're actually working on the next generation to solve this very particular problem, embedding AI native mechanics in the video game itself so that we can differentiate by creating a deeper player immersion, drive engagement, really personalizing it with these AI native experiences. If you've got generative AI running in the video game, how do you pay for it all?
Yes.
How do you?
Well, with money.
So I want to share a little bit about the story building Retail Mage, because this was such a big part of that experience for us. Jam&T, we shipped Retail Mage last November. When we were at GDC, not this last year, the year before, so 2024, we had a tech demo of the technology we had where we were using generative AI in the game loop. And it was awesome. I thought it was awesome. We had good feedback, right? The trouble is that now, when we first did that playtest, end of December 2023, we were at the time prototyping rapidly. So we were just like using like OpenAI primarily API calls to prototype quickly. And keep in mind, granted, 2023, the costs were a lot higher than where they are now. Per token costs have come down. But like a 4-player, 30 to 40 minute session could run like hundreds of dollars, right? It was like a ticket to Disneyland every time you played the game. And now by GDC, we had gotten it down to say $40 or so, but you can't run a game. And so people kept saying, could we ship a game? And I was like, it's not that I can't, I believed we had a lot of work to do to build a game. I don't want to underestimate that. But the big blocker to me at the time was like, I could build the game, but I can't ship it because it's going to be too expensive. long story short, we had a partner who came in who challenged us on that. And we got challenged to think, what can we get it down to? Now, our goal at the time was to see if I could get it to $2 per player session. We got it down to 50 cents. But if you look at Retail Mage, there's a lot, like that whole year, everything I was thinking about was how do I get like this cost down? Because a lot of the game design of Retail Mage and the product design was constrained by how expensive it was to run. So Retail Mage does not have a lot of retention mechanics in it, somewhat intentionally, because if someone played 200 hours of the game, like how do I monetize that? And we had an initial monetization that we were considering like charging almost like per engagement or have other ways to monetize that time. In the end, we got it low enough that we felt like we could just charge what we could and we knew how to get the cost down. But compared to so many other games, rather than my time as a CTO, as kind of the tech director, rather than being so focused on like building the cool game, building the cool things, I was thinking like, how do I make this cheap? That was dominating my thought process for the 5-6 months that we were building Retail Mage.
And it absolutely should. If your product is too expensive to run, you don't have a video game that you can market. You can't put it out in production. No one's going to be able to play it because you can't afford to run it. This for me is a really important thing to do, not just as the technology leader, but to figure out a way to empower the people making the video game to understand the total cost of ownership, the unit economics of adding AI native mechanics to certain game features. So when I think about through that whole problem space, if you're trying to solve for that problem after the fact, you've already lost. If you solve for that problem by paying the bill at the end of the month, you're probably going to burn your whole budget. You're going to be in serious trouble. And putting this in practice, for me, it means servicing the information to the people actually working on the video game. We've done that by doing things like understanding the total cost of ownership, which is not just how much does it cost to host a model, how much is the API cost, how many tokens am I burning. It's all the things that go into that, the DevOps time it takes to set it up and maintain that. If you're running GPUs, the total GPU time, not just that few milliseconds you needed to consume, that sort of thing. And so when you bundle all that together, it gives you a pretty good idea of what that particular mechanic is going to do. And so you can service that in a dashboard. You can say, you made these calls, you use this particular service, it's going to cost you this much. And so you can look at it through a lens of, does this particular moment make sense financially? Is the value of the moment that we've delivered greater to the value to the player than the total cost?
So with these dashboards, that gives you an idea for a given setup what the cost of deploying the game would be. But then there's the question of, for example, Aaron's route to go from $2 to 50 cents. What are the levers that you can actually pull to bring that cost down? I would love to hear from you guys. What are those? My initial hunch is that there's a lot of it goes to you increasingly define a narrower task for what you want these models to do, so you can fine tune and deploy smaller models rather than trying to use full-blown AGI that does everything for just asking, is this fire or water?
Sorry.
There's always going to be that temptation to go find the biggest, smartest, most powerful model you possibly can to solve a particular problem. Sure, because it can solve that problem. It makes it easy. Yeah. But so there's going to be a lot of tactics I think we can talk about today about how to actually lower those costs. There's a lot of tricks you can play. I think that the important thing to think about here is that one of the nuances you need to consider is, does the spend make sense from an engagement standpoint? Because if you go back to my original thesis of, okay, anybody can make high quality content, how do you differentiate? We differentiate with AI native game mechanics to deepen experience. Does it make sense to actually allocate a budget like you would for user acquisition, specifically designed to pay for the retention by paying for the compute to support it?
So Josh, I really appreciate the sophistication of the thinking there. I'm wondering, how do you balance discovery versus optimization? Because my approach at the time was, one of the reasons it cost so much when we first started was I was like, look, we're just prototyping, we're just playtesting. If it costs me, $200 per playtest and we run like 5 or 6 of them, it's the cost of doing business to explore new frontiers. But there does come a point when you want to say, all right, now I need to start paying attention to cost. So how do you know when, like, how do you as a team determine when to flip that? And by having this dashboard, are you concerned at all that, like, you might have designers who are overly cost conscious and therefore don't explore potential engagement opportunities because they're like, oh, I don't know if the ROI is going to be there?
I think you're making a lot of sense, actually. Designers don't really care how much money they spend
Okay.
to create an amazing user experience, and they'll fight you for that. And that makes perfect sense. They should. Their job is to make something amazing that people love to play. Just because we can't afford it doesn't mean we can't always find a way to afford it. Look at your point example. You started off with something that cost a lot to something, and you reduced that cost by a factor of 20, was it?
Yeah.
Or 3 orders of magnitude.
Yeah. I do think there is a lot of innovation right now that is being held back by costs.
Yeah.
Like, I've talked to studios, large AAA studios and technology providers who point out that, like, everybody's playing with stuff and everybody's exploring, but there are many who are sitting on the sidelines a bit, waiting for those costs to go down, because it's hard to spin up a team and allocate the capital and the budget to spin up a team and say, go make an AI native game, when right now, if you said, and how do we make money off of it?
And I think so obviously this is problematic for every studio, but it's particularly bad for indie developers or just people who are like not even well funded, right? I keep thinking of like the Flash era of how the ability to create a simple game, putting out there and see how people reacted, allowed for a lot of experimentation that I think is very censored right now. Because if your game does well, it just punishes you for doing well, because you suddenly get a big bill out of generative AI.
And I couldn't have, if this has been my weekend project, hacking on it, and I did tests before, but there comes a point where, yeah, if I'm going to spend a couple grand on a weekend to play test an idea, gets to be an expensive hobby real fast.
Yes.
For an indie, as opposed to, we were capitalized, we had raised some capital because we had these upfront costs.
Yeah.
That totally makes a lot of sense until you realize some of the recent advances that have been made with how you can actually run these models. A couple of weeks ago, I tried an experiment because Google asked me to. I took their Gemma 3 Nano model and I ran it inside of a web page in my browser on my little MacBook. There are models out there and frameworks and systems specifically designed to allow you to run generative AI on device. I'm talking commodity mobile devices here, not something that's a powerhouse. And so are you going to get the same performance as you get, or quality as you get out of a big foundational model? Of course you're not. But we can talk about ways to actually get equivalent level performance on commodity hardware. There are technological paths and solutions there. I think the important point we should probably make in this podcast is that you shouldn't be shy away from experimentation. Try your craziest idea, and you can find ways to not worry about the cost. A lot of financial model providers, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, they're offering credits to developers where you can try all these things basically for free, no cost to you, which does open up that as a playground for you to go experiment with. You can try out ideas. You can work with these really high-performance models and see if that's going to actually be a workable game mechanic or not.
So I understand a lot of these providers have all of these support for startups or individuals experimenting. But I think the one that I'm most excited about, that I've been thinking that is like the right approach, is Anthropic is slowly rolling out, or recently rolled out, the ability for you to deploy an app and then let the user sign in with their own Anthropic credentials.
Artifacts.
Exactly, with their artifacts. I think that's the right way. Like that way, it's the equivalent of back in the day. Oh, you let the players buy nice fancy GPUs to run your game. Now you let the players bring their own APIs and be responsible for their own. Like they get to say, is the game worth, or the artifact, is it worth whatever tokens they're paying for? I feel like that should be something that Open Router should do rather than something that a single model provider should do. But I think I would love to see more in that on that side of bring your own credentials to play this game.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant. If I can show up with my open router token and use any model I want with a particular video game or product or application, that's a huge game changer because you've outsourced the cost of the compute to the player base.
It was something we considered with Retail Mage at one point, or we could change the cost to be much lower or something. And then if you've used up the tokens that we've allocated for you, you could always pay for more. The challenge, I think, is that it's definitely a new business model, which is maybe a whole other conversation we might get into, is what are the potential ways to think about the value we're delivering in these games and how players may pay for them. But I think it does also, like, the hobbyist, and there's definitely a hobbyist modder community in the game industry that would not shy away from any of that. And if, for example, that we open sourced Retail Mage or released it, I would probably include that would be a thing that we would do. So you can run it, but you need to put in your token, your API key here, go have at it. But I don't know, like, I think it would, to Ramon, to your point, it would require another provider like Anthropic to be the mediator of those costs before, or Open Router, although I doubt that most game players even know what Open Router is, let alone
I think you have to start with AI enthusiasts and then move your way towards the proper gaming base. I'm talking more from an experimentation point of view of, like, you're trying different game ideas versus once you're actually trying to monetize a full-blown game, maybe that looks a little bit different.
Well, given a world where I show up, play your video game, I sign in with OAuth, and it figures out how my account's going to pay for the AI cost to power that video game, what does transparency look like at that point? Because I don't have any knowledge going into that about what's going to show up on my bill.
Oh, you mean on the player side or on the game developer side?
On the player side.
Oh,
so
yeah,
any form of
100%.
microtransaction.
Yeah.
A trillion tokens.
Yeah, exactly. This is maybe you're just like labeling stuff with their accounts, right? Oh yeah, playing this is like not Flappy Birds, but it's like labeling a bunch of data. Like LLM is a judge, like on someone else's API.
So, okay, I do want to call out, man, there's so many topics for us here, but I do want to call out, because you hinted at, Ramon, that when we had been talking with Nick Walton from AI Dungeon, one of his points on this was, hey, maybe historically players are willing to, in the game industry, we're willing to pay for something, like we buy consoles, for example, or we buy GPUs. And part of that is we're paying for new capabilities, right? We're like, I want to pay for better graphics. Not all players, but like that definitely is a segment of the market. So the question is, are there players that are essentially willing to pay for intelligence, right? Or for experience in some way? And is that, will that be part of the thing? Because if you look at how AI Dungeon works, like they do actually directly monetize, because they're a little come from a very early era of these games where it's, okay, I'm going to play through this fan fiction kind of story, which my subscription is tied to essentially how smart my story is going to be. If I want a more sophisticated storytelling experience, I'm willing to pay for that.
We also have to factor in the emotional attachment here. I've got an AI companion. I've spent hundreds of hours with them crafting like this unique narrative experience together. Not only do I want to continue to maintain that relationship, because it's no longer a player engagement experience, it's I built a relationship with an artificial entity at that point. And so not only do I want to continue that relationship, but I also think there's a switching cost here. You're not going to want to actually switch away from that to a competitor's AI companion, because I already have this deep investment with the one I've already spent time with.
Until you have a big breakup. But yeah.
Or they change the underlying
You
model.
go no contact with them.
Until you stop paying for tokens and it became unresponsive.
Yeah.
You talked about a topic earlier, because I think you have a slightly different view of the way I've described return on investment often. So when I've talked to designers, I'm usually talking about, usually the way I think of it is, yes, just because we can use machine learning for tool A or tool B, like, what do we really get out of it? Is it useful? Ramon, you had said you could use all of the power of the planet and the sun to determine is something wet or dry and map that label. But there might be other algorithms, heuristics that we've had, procedural generation and whatnot. So I've often want to take a look I've got this big tool belt, this repertoire of tools. Machine learning, generative AI fit in this somewhere. I'm trying to use them where they actually make a difference from the player experience. And that goes to what you've been saying, Josh. You're saying something about like the value of the feature from an engagement perspective.
Yeah, I'm looking at everything through the lens of the player, right? Does this increase value for the player based upon how much it's going to cost to provide that feature or service? And so if you look at it through that lens, it does give you a pretty good idea of the unit cost associated with providing that particular feature. And the kind of thing we're talking about here, to be clear, is something like you have a non-player character that remembered your conversation from 2 weeks ago, or that crafted a unique quest for you to go on. These are all non-deterministic outcomes based upon your player triggers within that environment.
Are you measuring that? Is your idea that is something that is therefore a metric that you would pull in playtests and on live games of trying to identify the amount players engage with certain features or things like that? Or is this another one of the arts of game design where you just a good designer's like, no, but them remembering from 2 weeks ago is really matters. And there's nothing against all my game designer friends. I'm not saying that they shouldn't say that. That is the art of game design sometimes.
I'm not knocking game designers. They're showing up with a unique, inherent psychological understanding of the player that myself, as a technocrat, I don't have that very well. I'm more of a ones and zeros thinker. And given that particular bias of mine, I'm going to look at the numbers. Is there information in their current engagement and retention statistics that are clearly indicative of how well a particular mechanic worked? And I think there's existing best practices out in the industry by instrumenting your A/B test, for example, and that sort of thing. They'll allow you to clearly differentiate between, okay, this is the response with the feature, this was the response without. We can compare the engagement side by side, factor in the cost, and see whether or not this is a workable mechanic for sustainable gameplay.
Where does that, every one of these generative AI powered features comes with a marginal cost during play time. In one sense, that cost has to be taken, unless you're shaving off profits or whatever profit margin games already have, it has to come from somewhere else. Is the expectation that you're basically lowering your user acquisition cost? Is that where like you're spending less on user acquisition and because of this set of AI features? Or where should one expect the accounting from a ones and zeros type of persona? Where does the accounting start making sense?
I think there's two ways to approach it. Like I've mentioned previously, you can say, okay, is this simply an investment in engagement, getting eyeballs on my product and keeping them there? The other path is to say, hey, game designers, if you want to add this feature, you need to figure out a way to pay for it. Add some sort of mechanism that allows the player to actually account for the cost that they're incurring. That could be anything from in-app purchase to ad support to offloading the cost to your player base itself by putting the model on their locally on their device. You need to find some way to actually make this pay for itself if you're not treating it solely as an engagement investment.
Gotcha.
The follow-up I had on that goes back to, I think it was something you said it towards the beginning around thinking about the application of machine learning and generative AI to game development as a opportunity for differentiation, as opposed merely to a kind of race to cheap infinite content. And in fact, that I do agree with that, because when we were thinking about our strategy at Jam, I made a point when we were pitching to investors and talking to folks that the tool and workflow productivity is interesting, but from a studio perspective, I did not think that was the value there, that the arbitrage opportunity would be limited and evaporate as everybody gets these toolings. And so the thing that we needed to focus on was, from a player perspective, as it said, is like, how does this create something new that we did not have before? How do we create experiences that are engaging, that we wanted, that are differentiated? So I'm curious how you're thinking about that a bit more What does differentiated mean for you? How do you measure it? Is it just engagement, or is there something else you're also thinking about?
All great questions. If you're looking at what's going on in the industry, everyone's becoming AI fluent. They're adopting these tools in the workflow. They're getting really good at making high quality products very quickly. Same thing's happening with assets. People can make high quality assets very easily, very cheaply. And so I have to assume that the market, which is already super saturated, looking at the number of game launches alone on mobile, there were hundreds of thousands of them happened last year. I have to assume that that is going to increase significantly. So the signal noise ratio is going to be the most extreme ever. And so the only moat that matters at that point is the players that you've acquired, people actively engaging in your product. And so that's why I've been thinking about why engagement is so important, and not only engaging those players, but also retaining them. And I see the AI powered path through that maze is by deepening the player experience. And so I think we're going to see in this next year a lot of brand new novel AI mechanics that we've never been able to do before. That's empowered by AI. I think things we dreamed about 10 years ago or 20 years ago are now possible.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's really going to be the unique engagement, because once you actually deliver that particular feature, you get it in the hands of players, and then you collect the information on that interaction. If I collect every piece of information about you interacting with a particular NPC, and I feed that data stream back into the AI, refine it, fine tune it, make it better, I've created an engagement flywheel. I can use the data from the engagement itself to make the AI better, which makes the engagement better, and it's going to continue to get better. And so you can actually leverage the data created by the AI native experience itself to self-sustain.
So you're talking about these players that you've acquired as like the only thing that matters. One of the things I keep thinking, or I think it was Raf Koster that posted, is that a lot of what you need to do is that whatever you're working on in games has to fit in like a 60-second teaser. In this way, I interpret graphics as being not entirely, but to a big degree, is something you can show off in 60 seconds. Art is something you can show off in 60 seconds. It's really, they are really good baits for people to say, oh, I want to play that. And I wonder, not all AI mechanics work like that. They're not 60 seconds, like a deep relationship with, I think of character AI. I don't know if you can, before trying it, I don't know if you can get that out of 60 seconds of someone, look, I have my waifu. It's very cool. I don't know if that's something if you can flash in 60 seconds. Or like we were talking about, oh, this NPC remembers you from 2 weeks ago, what you did and what you said. Is that something like you can flash in 60 seconds and people are like, I want to try that? Because if not, then I worry that then AI, like once you go into brutal optimization of the budget, then it's not going to fit into that, acquiring players.
You've turned up a really hard problem to talk about. What is the general rule of thumb? You make a $10 million video game, you need $100 million to market it with just to launch it, something like that. So we're already talking about a problem of brutal economics, and we've just made it a little bit harder because we're talking about creating novel experiences that might be hard to explain within a 60-second window.
Yes.
So I have to say 60 seconds of waifus probably sells itself.
I was going to say, we got a great sound clip on you now, Ramon.
Watching the trend on that has been eye-opening, to say the least.
Part of like, how to say, this is a total tangent, but one of my favorite views of history is that history is just us learning about ourselves, because we keep putting humans in different scenarios and seeing how we react. So it's a little bit of what if we do this. And our current what if is, what if we put digital and how do humans react? Turns out positively.
Without rabbit holing on the loneliness epidemic or the screen time addiction phenomenon, and circling back to how do we market?
Wait, I'm going to jump. Sorry. You tried to get away. You tried to get away, Josh. But no, the reason though is you mentioned the loneliness epidemic and while we're on this tangent, Carl and I, that was actually one of our first motivations for Jam and Tea, was thinking about how games bring people together. In fact, we have this kind of thesis of ways that we can use generative AI to bring people together, to like harness this technology for good, as opposed to harness it for like even more, now I don't need humans at all. I just can live in this all my AI companion world. So I think there's some interesting ways that we can enhance multiplayer experiences and communities through this tech. I do think the first place a lot of folks go to is I can create this world or this relationship that is very personal to me, and I get my own little bubble, and it just extends that kind of, you're already in this like algorithmic bubble where like all the social media has been tuned to you, now your gameplay gets tuned to you, and now you're just like, I just live in a separate universe. Each of us have our own highly tuned virtual universe that's like this cocoon. And I think there are days when that might feel attractive, but I don't think that's the path for humanity that I'm trying to build. And my challenge for those that listen in this space is, how do we also use this technology to enhance our humanity and do the things that games also do of bringing us together, which is challenging. So I know you tried to get us away from waifu land there, Josh. Continue.
So circling back to waifu, I think you brought up a really important point. AI is a nuclear weapon. You can use it for immense good or immense bad things. You could literally use generative AI to maximize your addictive traits, to keep you engaged in a product in order to maximize that product's revenue.
Well, various new psychoses, apparently.
Yeah, of course. But you can also use it for something that's really good at, and that is being your real-time collaborator in creating a new world, a new experience. And if you add the multiplayer mechanic to that, I'm doing it now with my friends. We're getting together, we're telling a shared story, having a shared experience, and all of that is powered by AI. You've now gone into a whole new space.
Yeah. Ramon, to your point, I know it doesn't, because we've struggled, and we've talked about this before. We've struggled with that. What's that 10-second wow moment that you can show? And I think we may still have some of them. Often they do feel rather shallow because it's, okay, I generated this space, that's really cool or something. But I don't know that it shows the real, it's like a teaser for what I think some of the real value is. And I think about games like Dwarf Fortress or RimWorld, or even some RTS games or strategy games, Civilization, which may not, they have to sell a certain fantasy often. In the case of Dwarf Fortress, you're definitely not selling the graphics.
Yeah.
Your dying is fun is, I think that's the mantra for that game. So I think there are ways to sell something. One thing that I've been doing increasingly is trying to tell or share stories that express what's possible with the technology, that you're like, yeah, I never could have. How was that possible? How did that's not, we couldn't do that in video games before. But you have to relay the story. It's an example for Dwarf Fortress, for those that are familiar with the game. One of the enduring stories is actually really around the bug with the cat and the alcohol. If you know that story, yes, you're right. And if you don't, just Google, anyone who doesn't know, just Google that, you're in for a treat, right? And so suddenly that story is one of the best, I think, ads, so to speak, for Dwarf Fortress. And it, for some folks, it scares them away. And others are like, yes, this is what I'm here for, is this type of simulation and experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, so now you make me think, and I think, for example, for Retail Mage, if you were to tell me, what is the 10-second fantasy thing, your internal experiments when your NPCs summon other NPCs and then those kept on summoning, I think that's a type of silliness that I think in 10 seconds would be like, oh, fuck yeah, I want to try that. But I keep thinking like, okay, there's experimentation of what works for games, but because this is such a expensive feature set, we also have to say, okay, it has to work for the game itself, but also it has to do a lot of work for us for it to be worthwhile. Or at least that's my feeling, right? That's the problem I see in early adoption of this in games.
If you look at something like Fortnite, where you've got this powerful UGC community, and they're basically building maps that you can go play on. But you take that same exact mechanic and you apply it to every video game. The three of us can get together, play a video game together, a role-playing game, a first-person shooter. The AI makes it for us in real time when we get together, start our game play a session together. What is that kind of a mechanic worth? Were we ponying up $20 each for just to play that one particular session together? I think these are all revenue models and pricing opportunities that are completely unexplored because these mechanics are brand new and they are just coming out into the world of possibility.
Josh, I was super excited to have the conversation because like your thinking on this space is maybe other people are having it. I just haven't cornered them at a conference or on LinkedIn properly, because I think that you don't really get to some of this thinking until you started to really wrestle with building AI native games or putting AI into the game loop and thinking about it beyond just I put an AI NPC and dropped it into the game, or put in some dialogue mod into Skyrim or something. Like when you really have to start wrestling with it. And so you've talked a bit about the differentiation. You've talked a bit about measuring it. Do we want to dive into where the costs come from and how we like, because we can measure it and then we can decide, is it worth it? I think particularly as technologists, I feel, and I said with Retail Mage, part of my job was like, okay, how do I drive those costs down? Do you think that's something that studios is incumbent upon studios? Is that incumbent upon like partners like InWorld or Google or others to solve? Is it a partnership between them? Like, where's your space? Where's your thinking on like the actual, like, where is the cost and how do we change that number?
I think this is a great question simply because there's a lot of noise, a lot of confusion in this space about what is this stuff, how does it work, how much does it cost. Typically, most game studios, that's not within their financial means or within their expertise. So the saving grace here is that you have the big four, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and XAI, who are making the world's best foundational models that are amazing. And because they're going head to head in competition, they're increasing at their quality performance while cost is coming down simultaneously. That's rapidly evolving. It's a great thing for everyone to use. You definitely want to do a buy versus build in this particular space, but that's not the full solution. If you do have some ML ops, if you do have some DevOps teams, you can put together pipelines that allow you to actually bootstrap off of not only these closed source foundational models, but also the rapidly evolving open source community. Look at Hugging Face. What they're launching on average, 100 new models a day or something. It's going so fast, I'm not even keeping track.
Yeah, it's all of its own to keep track.
You look at another A16Z company, Civet AI, there's 1,000,001 models and LoRa's and things there on that one as well. And so you have this large, powerful, rapidly evolving open source community. You can go grab one of those models and then you can distill the crap out of it. You prune out everything you don't need, fine tune it for your particular workload. You can actually use the request and responses you were using with one of these big, powerful foundational models and actually fine tune your little open source model that you've tuned down and distilled down. Then you quantize it for the hardware you want to stick it on. And now you have something small, tight, and easy to run that you can put it on device. You can put it on just CPUs rather than GPUs in the cloud. You have a lot of options there to actually lower the unit cost of deploying and maintaining this infrastructure. So not your hands aren't tied, but there's definitely a lot of nuance.
The techniques that you brought up make not all, but a significant portion of the cost savings that we did with Retail Mage. Like moving from, like we run, so Retail Mage is actually primarily uses Google's Gemma 2, the 9 billion parameter model, and runs on Amazon's cloud at the time. And having to roll up get our hands dirty, move to an open weight model. At the time, I had thought it would be possible back when we were making that decision of, okay, maybe if we move to hosting our own, but there was a lot of work there to determine what that actual cost was, to your point of what's the full end-to-end cost. And you had a great explanation at the beginning. And so I think it is, I don't want to scare people away, but I have been telling people that if you are thinking about building these games and taking them to production, you probably do need some ML ops chops on your team, some skill set, because we have not commoditized yet, I think, really cutting edge or sophisticated uses of the application where you could just simply make the calls to Amazon or Google or Anthropic AI. As much as I know those partners are looking at it, I think we may get there, or there'll be custom middleware providers, whether it's Convey or InWorld or others that like provide this kind of game AI focused infrastructure, or that the technology itself will become as well understood that it's people aren't afraid of. Some game studios are, but not everyone's afraid of running their own Kubernetes cluster or something like that, right? Like where you're like, okay, it's something we know. But I think right now, when I started pitching, I agree. Don't write your own model, do your own model. But even when in 2023, I was like, I'm not even sure. I don't even know if I want to deal with fine tuning stuff. And it did not take long before I was fine tuning things, because that was the only way we were going to get where we needed to go. I do think that if you're really wanting to push my opinion right now is that if you want to push the frontier, you need a game development team, and you also need to be versant in machine learning and AI infrastructure to really push what's possible today.
Do you mind explaining a little bit why you think that? So my hunch is that you mean it in the sense that fine-tuning and doing all of these optimizations as part of the game iteration cycle requires someone in your team to do this, versus if you rely on some external partner, the cycles are too slow. Is that the primary case? Because I can imagine a world where if it's not a game, it's just these are the requirements and I can ship it to you, and then you can give it to a team in Google. They will do the fine tuning and then you get the model that you wanted. But I imagine that in games that doesn't work as well unless you have the full game set up and then you can ask for the model. Is that the primary reason, or what is your main reason why you think you need to have?
I'm also curious first for Josh, like what's your take on this of yes, Aaron, I agree, or no, or it's more complicated than that? And then I'll give my response.
For starters, I completely agree. With the current state of the art, the way it exists today, if you're trying to deploy, fine-tune, distill, quantize your own models, run them economically to solve specific AI native game mechanics, and you don't have MLOps experience, you don't have DevOps experience, you're going to be in serious trouble. Yes, there are tools out there to help vibe your way around some of these problems, but it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, I would say it's a couple of factors, Ramon, in my experience, what I found. And again, everything is changing so quickly that someone starting today would definitely have a different journey than I did. I think you can absolutely get started by outsourcing this, and I would encourage people to do, meaning like, yes, just make calls to OpenRouter or Anthropic or OpenAI or InWorld or whoever. Just pick your provider or select providers, set your team up so that if you're the technologist making this decision, set that up and let them just go. Make sure you have enough budget to let them prototype rapidly. I think there are a couple ways in which this ultimately, though, challenges. One, I think that at some point, the cost question will come up, and you won't be able to make the kind of decisions that Josh is talking about. Like the team won't be equipped with figuring out, do we keep investing in this feature or not? Because they don't really know how much it's going to cost. Because if you don't know how to get those costs down, right? Like the team's flying blind, right? And so you're going to have to wrestle with those costs and at least get a ballpark sense of, to take it to production, can we take it to production? Taking it to production is going to require this investment today, right? Or you're going to have to understand, like, are we married to Google as our provider? Maybe yes, maybe no. But you're going to have to make those kind of decisions that Josh mentioned. And I believe to make those decisions today, you're going to end up having to have that level of sophistication. So at some point, the production process slows down because you don't have that as an input to determine what features to polish, what is the final feature set, can we take it to production? I think there are features where your games is a multidisciplinary product. It takes art, it takes technology, it takes story. And wielding technology, like the teams that can truly wield that technology do magical things that others are like, I can't believe that was possible because you did something with the graphics, you did something with the AI, you did something with the user interface, the input that was not done before. And it's because you took that technology, wielded the technology to create this new experience. And so if you're incumbent upon another partner to wield that technology for you, you will never push it the way you might need to push it, right? So you might not know, hey, like, what can we get away with if we can run on device? Or if we're in the cloud, is the latency killing us? And so we're not considering an experience, right? Or can we push the type of computation we do with a model or the type of reasoning we do with a model? We may need to train that model ourselves, try different models. We need to really wrestle with that technology to understand its potential and capability and understand how it really expresses itself. Finally, I think there's a feasibility question too. It's a bit related to my first point of not only the costs are coming down, but preparing for success.
Mm-hmm.
Our good folks, the Umbrella folks, they did Death by AI. That game took off in ways that they didn't quite expect. And they really needed partners that they'd found to help them manage that scale. One of the message that when I'm talking, I'm curious, Josh, if you've had similar conversations, when I talk with Google and Microsoft and the other hyperscalers, Amazon, and one of the interesting conversations I have with them is saying, hey, let's extrapolate here, right? Now, we're always getting more efficient, but like on this particular cloud GPU, an A100 or whatever, right? Or an H100, I'm able to get X number of players at capacity given a certain inference load, which is a profile of a game. To your point, Josh, earlier, of, hey, okay, here's all this unit economics of those features, create a certain profile load, right? So that gives me a maximum CCU, concurrent players, on a given GPU profile, given an average load, right? And we think about this with CPU all the time. Hey, I've got a game server. How many players can I fit on a game server? How many hundreds or thousands of players can I fit on that game server? At least what I've been able to pull off so far, and I think it'll get better, I'm at least one, if not two orders of magnitude off what I can do on a CPU. Like how many players for that Epic can fit? How many Fortnite players can Epic fit on a server, right?
Yeah.
I'm one or two order of magnitude off of that on a GPU. So if you could imagine that, let's say I have even a couple hundred players on one of these GPUs. If you were a top 100 Steam game, the number of cloud GPUs you'd be going to Google or Amazon, the TPUs or that you would need, or that go to Azure or AWS, and you'd be like, I need 1,000 GPUs for this game, or 10,000 GPUs for these. If you had 100,000 concurrent players, you might be at the current state, you might be taking up one of the largest GPU clusters that Meta has right now, right? That would be maybe one game. It's improved significantly and it's going to keep improving. But that's a point also why we have to struggle with this, not just ourselves, but you have to be versed in this, because if you just think, oh, these folks will scale this for me. I was like, if I came to you and said, if this game takes off and even if I can monetize it, I need 10,000 GPUs. Can you deliver them?
Yeah.
An interesting conversation to have. And of course, the hyperscalers would love for the game industry to need all these GPUs. But I think it's also incumbent upon them. Like there's this partnership that I think we need to have to say the products they're building even, right? And the way they're building them are oriented, I think, to more enterprise agentic forms that I think games push the technology a little differently. And so if you're either going to need to build that yourself, or you're going to need to have engage with them to understand like why I can't just use Vertex or Bedrock out the gate because of my latency requirements or something else. Because we just have a different way of wielding the technology, I think we will, than someone who's building it to enhance their tax application software or whatever.
There's quite a bit to unpack there.
Yeah, sorry.
For starters, if you need 10,000 GPUs to support 100,000 players, I think you've made some bad decisions along the way because you've just incinerated your budget. If you're talking to AWS, you're talking to Azure, you're talking to GCP, and you say, hey, this is what I need for now. This is what my scaling requirements are going to be. Can you allocate the hardware to support that? They love those conversations.
Right.
If you have them far enough in advance, you can actually get those kinds of allocations put in place. You can allocate them dynamically, so you could have GPU workloads distributed geographically to support a global player base. There are solutions there. Unfortunately, they're often really expensive. You mentioned Bedrock, you mentioned Vertex. Yes, I can just upload a model or use one of their existing models, call the API, I'm done. All infrastructure is managed by them, and that's an easy way to get in the door. but it doesn't give you the tight control that you can have with Kubernetes, where you can fine tune and have discrete control over every little facet of cost. But it requires a much, much higher skill level. There's also something in the middle, serverless. Containerize your model, put it in a serverless solution like Google Cloud Run, set your main containers to 1 so you already have something warm so you don't have to worry about the latency problem, and it gives you a middle of the road solution path there. But at the end of the day, I think one of the things that you need to critically consider is that there's an inherent latency in calling generative AI.
Yeah.
So your game loop should never, ever stop and wait for generative AI to respond to anything. You need to also be able to plan for saying, okay, the latency might be really bad because I only have 5 GPUs. I'm just going to let those requests queue up and they'll be handled in turn. And if you design your game around the fact that you have a fixed cost structure, you can design around that. You can still deliver an AI native experience, and you can do so on a budget.
Is this why you were talking earlier about needing MLOps and DevOps with inside the team? Into Aaron's point, this is where the magic of stretching the boundaries is. You also need to stretch on the DevOps side.
Aaron's right. If you're an expert at something, you're going to be able to bring more out of that than someone who's not. But I hate to underestimate the ability of someone to sit down with their favorite AI companion and learn something rapidly. So there's always that factor as well.
I agree that there are lots of ways to constrain the cost to make it cost prohibitive or cost effective right now. But I think of it also as though we're back at Wolfenstein or Doom, and it was a crazy accomplishment that we could get the kind of graphics we could. But as we see in the long arc of game development, we're going to be hungry. And every time the compute becomes cheaper, we're going to have all these more ways to utilize it. So I think what I expect is that same with AI is that we'll find, maybe to Ramon's earlier point, this kind of like steady state where we got this much budget for server-side ops, whether those are game servers on live service games today, but also for AI. And even if the unit cost goes down, we're just going to fill that back up with new features that we've been sitting on the back, that's on the back end being like, I used to only call this function once every 2 minutes, but now I can call it every 30 seconds. And that means that the experience has this much higher fidelity.
That's
undoubtedly. It's definitely going to go there. Every time you give game devs more compute, they're going to burn it all, right? And there's some hidden costs here as well that people should be aware of, especially people who are new to this whole world. You're not just paying for GPUs. Even if the open source model is free, and you're paying for your salaries for your MLOps and your DevOps teams, there's some other things you need to think about as well. If I have a non-player character with tailored dialogue that has memory of all of our interactions, you need to collect all that data, you need to store it somewhere, and then you need to stream that data back to the generative model in time for it to actually craft the next response. So the elevated data gathering, storage, and delivery requirements are one of those hidden costs that are baked into all of this that you need to be aware of as well as part of your TCO calculation.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
Do you, when you're thinking about this, Josh, like how... I guess I'm curious about your story of your evolution of understanding all of this. Was this things that you understood when you jumped into series entertainment and you're like, look, we need to understand the total cost for memory of AI NPCs? Or is this something evolved? And could you explain a little bit of your evolution of this thinking and the kind of the where you're at right now?
We started off with GPT-3 in late 2022, figuring out ways to use it to write narrative dialogue. And so as from this standpoint, GPT-3 is this absurdly primitive, barely functional piece of crap that no one would ever consider using anymore. We have far more advanced and superior models today. So it's been a couple of years of learning the 10,000 ways to use generative AI incorrectly. We've learned a lot of lessons along the way that has taught us some really strong best practices on ways to use it to make video games. And then we spent the last 9 months or so on this next generation of video games where they have the AI native mechanics built in. And so that sparked a lot of thinking and research and trial and error on my part to figure out how do we actually run this stuff once we push this game out the door. We've got titles that are going to be launching in the next 12 to 18 months with baked-in mechanics that are powered by generative AI. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how all this stuff is going to work. And the nice thing about us as technology leaders is the vendors are paying attention to this problem too. This is not a problem that's unique to just game development. Everyone's trying to put AI into their app now.
Yeah.
And so everyone's facing the same problem. How do I pay for that AI once my app is public and people are using it? And so we're seeing brand new technologies that are radically amazing. If you look at the GKE Inference gateway,
Mm-hmm.
that will sun chase GPUs across the planet in order to optimize your load. It also has built-in message routing based upon the state of the KV cache. It's built into your model's architecture. And it also uses intelligent routing to figure out, okay, do I need to go to a lower tier, lower cost model, or do I need to go to a higher cost model? So there are solutions that are emerging from the vendors to help us solve these problems. And I think they're going to be fairly mature by the time where we really see this go mainstream.
Do you mind elaborating what JKE is?
Google Kubernetes Engine.
Gotcha. So this goes back into the how much you're doing inside versus how much you're doing with partners. But how much do you in specific, but in general, should developers count on the industry keep pushing the costs down and the better tools, better infrastructure versus just, okay, this is what we have and we have to make it work?
I think it would be an unforced error to build something that is insanely compute hungry and just hope that by the time you launch it, it'll be cost effective.
Mm-hmm.
I really think this is the kind of thing a responsible leader does from day one, planning for the unit cost for the deployed application using the technology that you have today, not what you hope it's going to be months from now. And that way, if you plan for that scenario, it does give you the ability to naturally take advantage of these technologies as they emerge. And given the fact that this is generative technology, this is non-deterministic, hopefully you should have put in some knobs and switches and configurations along the way that allow you to dial up or dial down the performance of your AI native mechanics. If you're going to build flexibly anyway to accommodate non-deterministic outcome, you need to do the same thing for the amount of compute that you're going to resource against that.
Yeah, a lot of times I've been thinking about it as where am I shifting compute? It's a problem that I didn't quite have to deal with the same way in live service games. I guess some MMO design, you think about it a little bit, where you're like, where's the compute happening? How do I lower the overall cost? Generally, you're thinking, am I pushing it onto the players on the edge, right? Or is it happening in the cloud on the server? And I think the ML inference adds a much more complicated layer to thinking of. It's the same problem. I'm shifting where my compute happens. I'm moving my compute around to balance performance and experience and also costs. In multiplayer online games, we think about this quite a bit of like, where should this calculation happen? Can I put this on the player or on the console? Maybe that's better so I don't have that same cost on the back end, but I need to think about server authoritative architecture. The AI adds a significant wrinkle to it of where should that compute happen? And when should that compute happen? Can I pre-process some? Can I cache it? Does it need to be truly on demand? If so, when and where, on what device? I've worked with online games before. I feel like I've thought about this problem before, but it's taking it to a new level for me when I think about Retail Mage and what we're building in the future.
Yeah, I would say this is an order of magnitude harder than modern multiplayer video game development and deployment.
Yeah, anybody away.
We've been doing this for decades. We're pretty good at building multiplayer video games, even though that's actually really hard to do. We've got things like content delivery networks already in place. I can have replicated, cached, edge deployed content, having great UX, low latency. We know how to solve all those problems. But you look at generative AI, and I'm saying it's a lot harder because it literally is. Where do these models go? How do you orchestrate them? How do you use them? How do you make them cost affordable? This is such a big problem to solve that I think it requires a lot more attention in order to be able to do this responsibly. We talked about some shortcuts along the way to save on cost, to save on time, to make things simpler and easier to deploy. But at the end of the day, if you want something groundbreaking and you're taking advantage of some amazing models to give you some sort of amazing capability, you need to deploy that for a global player base. You need to make sure that you have your ducks in a row ahead of time in order to make that work. Now, you've actually deployed a game with generative mechanics in it, right?
Yes.
What lessons did you learn trying to actually run that thing?
The first was we definitely, like I said, we had to get our hands dirty. In our case, it wasn't merely starting to run our own, not our own models. They were running and testing against a number of open weight models. We actually had to get our hands dirty to the point of working with at the inference framework level. So we've contributed back to the SG Lang project and collaborated with them. And we needed to really think about how inference works at that level at the GPU to take not just for cost savings but also for features and for latency of how do we get, because latency is so important, like how do we get this back as fast as we can. We pulled off a few tricks with Retail Mage by positioning it, and even the game design, it's as much a showcase demo as it is like a full-fledged game. It is a full-fledged game, but we constrained the scope to something we thought we could achieve at the time. And I think we largely did that. I'd say in addition to getting our hands dirty, two other directions to take it. One is just plus one to everything else you've been saying, Josh, around just thinking about the total cost of ownership, thinking about the DevOps and ML side, the data collection, the whole thing are things that you need to take into account. Like if you're not doing that, and you have to give yourself time to set all of that up. But another is something else you've also mentioned too, which is a little less technical, but also just learning how to wield the technology to create interesting gameplay, right? On its own, that requires a lot of experimentation, right? You need to get it in the hands of designers and let them iterate quickly because it's new. We had a lot of things that we thought that will never work. Why would we even do that? I'm not even sure that's a good idea, but it's, you know what? You just have to try it. We're going to throw everything at the wall and see what it is. So it's a breadth first search instead of a depth first search, right, of the design space. So that means you need to iterate quickly. So investing in tools that allowed us to iterate, I think helped us discover game mechanics that we wouldn't have necessarily even thought of or believed in until we had looked at them. So I think that tooling and iteration process is particularly important when you're in a space where you don't have prior art, where you need to be open-minded in what will or won't work.
Oh, absolutely. Having that tool chain in place that allows people to not have to worry about how the underlying mechanics of machine learning actually work. They call an endpoint, they get back a response or something similar, where you simplify the integration to allow the game teams to move very rapidly is the kind of thing you want to do in order to allow them to experiment with a whole bunch of different things. But I think a big part of that is the budget. You want to set aside the time, you want to set aside the money to account for that time in order to say, let's do that breadth search, first search. Let's do rapid experimentation. Let's iterate on all the great ideas that we're coming up with until we find something that starts to work. I think from personal experience, we've tried many ideas that sounded great, but they turned out to be awful. When you actually sit down for your first playtest and you try it out and you're like, yeah, that was not a good idea. We need to rethink this. Being able to cycle through that as rapidly as possible is definitely a competitive advantage. Toolchain wise, did you build anything specific, or are you using open source stuff? Are you just talking about like the vibe coding? What are you talking about exactly?
Some of it was building out the infrastructure to be able to test with these. But the big part, and we've shown this off in a couple of videos here or there. If folks look at the video that we did when we were at reInvent last year, but we work in engine. So by that, one of the choices we made early on is that we didn't do a lot of prompt engineering like out of engine. The prompt engineering happens in engine. Everything is in engine. It's not like I create a nice, great prompt and then I sent that to OpenAI and come back and be like, look at how amazing it did these things, because we wanted to ensure that we could take it it's not even the last mile. It's a lot of the work of how do I express it in the game experience, right? Just because I get some interesting text back does not mean that I can express that in Unreal or Unity or else. That layer is extremely important. So that meant we built prompt engineering tools in the game. When you're in the game, you can bring up a number of debug tools while the game is running. That allows you to see all the inference that's happened. You can look at the inputs and outputs. You can then actually let's say we take a particular piece of inference that's happened, like a dialogue response. We have a tool that you can bring that in to an editor. So you could actually change the input and say, what if I phrase this a little different? And then you can queue it up to say, depending on the number of models we have running in the back end available, I want to rerun that particular piece of inference against these 5 different models at these different temperatures, go, and it will rerun that and then bring the output back so I can see what the difference would be. Now, that doesn't get pushed back into the game state because in a real time, we don't pause the game state at that moment. So you can just get the output. But what that allowed us to do is rapidly iterate because for us, the game state is so important and the result can be so sensitive to the game state. Rather than me handcraft that game state and think I got it right, I'm actually taking game state while the game is running and using that so I know this is actually how the response would be, and I can iterate in engine. So when I say like, that was one of a few things that we built that let us get a lot of confidence around whether a feature was, figuring out why a feature wasn't working could sometimes be very subtle. You could want to abandon an idea, but then realize, no, if we just reframe the way we leverage the engine, we can get the results we want. But that requires a lot of exploration of the ways of using a model wrong to start getting how to use right. And being able to do that in engine rapidly increased our ability to prototype.
Oh, absolutely. We've had a very similar experience where when you look at generative dialogue, you look at generative mechanics. If the QA team finds that problem, they can crack open the log, track down exactly where that came from, and that opens up the prompt chain or other resource. Yep. They can instantly bug that. My QA team, coincidentally, has gotten so good with vibe coding, they've actually fixed some of those problems themselves rather than going back to the engineering team. We're going way beyond the T-shaped individual at this point with some of the tools that are coming out. If you put the information in people's hands, they're going to use AI to try to fix it. Yeah. It's phenomenal.
We found that by having more of the game, by having some of the game logic and things in English, it also opened up who could fix and reason about it, whether they were tests or actual prompts. More of the team is able to contribute or debug in ways that they wouldn't have before.
So we're running a little bit out of time. We wanted to give you a bit of a chance, Josh, for any shout outs, how people can reach out to you or check out what Series is building, or any parting thoughts on the whole scene.
Parting thoughts. Since I am here in my official capacity, I'm not going to give out any specific shout outs other than Series Entertainment. Feel free to check us out online. Our website has 1 page on it. You probably won't learn much. If I had one piece of advice to give to other leaders listening to this podcast, it would probably be something along the lines of, don't get too caught up in the hype. Every single day I'm seeing dozens of really amazing, innovative, breakthrough quality demos of AI technology. But until you sat down and figured out the unit economics of that actually work, how you deploy that in production, you don't have a product yet. You have a science project instead. So I know it's kind of boring to think about the nerdy, nitty-gritty ones and zeros in the money it takes to actually make all this stuff work, but that's really the thing that you should be paying attention to. And I guess that was my final thoughts.
Very fair. Josh, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. I certainly learned a lot. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed talking to the two of you. It was really a lot of fun.
Thanks again, Josh.
Thanks for listening to the full episode. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion. It would help us out a ton if you subscribe to the show on your platform of choice, as well as shared it with folks you think would find it useful. You can always check out playingwithinference.com to get in contact with us, join our Discord, or just find the links to the episodes. See you next week.